is going to be a replay between Nightwing from the Sith clan and myself. I picked Parthia, and sensibly enough, Nightwing countered with Syracuse, and he brought a pretty hard counter, but I anticipated his counter since he counter-picked me, and I'm going to try to counter the counter. So he brought 16 spears, just a mix of all different kinds of hoplites and Tereos. Tereos are awesome units. They can deal with elephants fairly effectively, they can skirmish a bit. Very good units to have in your backline. And when I see my opponent's army here, I'm quite elated, because this is the exact army I was preparing for. Straight up infantry spam. Almost no skirmishers, no pikes, no swords, no cavalry, just straight up infantry spam. And the plan is very simple. I'm going to engage his front line with my swords, all of my swords, which is going to leave his flanks open for cataphract charges. And when I have killed enough of his thorax hoplites, or enough of his Tereo spears, I'm going to send in my elephants this way, in the flanks. So pulling away my general and elephants, these are going to take the long way around here. That's going to buy me the time to engage his front line. And I'm going for a preemptive strike on his Tereo spears, because they are anticipating this Parthian swordsman rush here. They are facing this way, they are not in square formation, and they won't be braced for what's coming next. So this charge, just a pretty damn near perfect Eastern cataphract charge, and I'm going to follow up with similar attacks on both sides. So does this remind you of anything? I thought of Cannae instantly, like a Syracuse versus Parthian Cannae, if Carthage had cataphracts. Bet they wish they had. So these guys are going to hammer the rear of the Syracusans. Already a unit of Tereos is going down due to rear charges and losing the combat. Both gives them morale penalties. He's going to chase after my Eastern cataphracts with his general, and I believe that's a mistake, because these Indian war elephants are on their way. The Parthian swords are doing pretty good here, and the Eastern cataphracts are coming in for more mayhem. The picked hoplites are getting charged themselves by my Royal Cataphract General. These Tereo spears are not braced because they are throwing javelins, so it's always a case of having to wonder whether to throw javelins or to brace. You can't do both at the same time, but now things are starting to look really bad, because these charges from my Eastern cataphracts are plowing through several units, giving these guys rear charge penalties, losing the combat penalties, and getting rear charged while being attacked by elephants and losing the combat. That's going to make even pretty high morale units break. So these guys have 60 morale, the mercenary Etruscans, and they don't like this very much at all. The thorax hoplites have 65, and when they are routing at almost 100 men, that's because of the elephant fear, because of losing the combat, and because of being rear charged. Had his general been closer here and been able to raise the banner and spire, that could have prevented what's happening now, but I kind of doubt it as well, because this is a textbook example of how to take on a huge blob of infantry when you have cavalry superiority and you have a special unit like an elephant. You tie down the infantry, you basically get your units into the flank and the rear, your cataphract units, your heavy shock cavalry units, and then it's just a matter of the infantry holding, getting some kills, while the rest of the units go absolutely berserk in the enemy rear and on the enemy flank. So here you have the thorax hoplites. They are just wavering at 60 men, and you don't see that very often. But that is because they are losing. They have enemy units routing all around them. They will get penalty pretty soon for their army losing this combat. And although I think I see what my opponent's thought process was here, that he wanted a dense formation that would be impervious to charges from the front, but since he failed to respond, presumably because I charged in with all of those swords, he failed to respond by turning his units around and facing the charging cataphracts and the elephants. The blob, actually was not to his benefit but to his detriment, because it allowed me to tie down a lot of units and make these charges just absolutely devastating. Now keep in mind that all of these kills are against good spear units. There were some militia hoplites there, but were picked hoplites in here, mercenary veteran hoplites, general picked hoplites that are just being smashed from all sides. And you can see how many units I have left on the field here. I hardly took any casualties. Some of my eastern cataphracts took some damage, but my Parthian swords barely took any damage at all, because I put them in shield wall, charged them in, and was able to support them. So I absolutely love this Parthian rush. It can run into problems against horse skirmishers and such, because they can skirmish the cataphracts and elephants to death, and then you're left with just basically mid-tier swords. But it can work if you're able to engage the main body of your enemy. So this is an army that it works against a lot of armies that are meant to counter Parthia, like spear-heavy armies and skirmish-heavy armies. But against let's say against just your standard Parthian army with a lot of skirmishers, horse skirmishers, you might run into problems, because the elephants can be dealt with, the cataphracts can be dealt with, and when these Parthian swords don't have support, they can die very quickly indeed, although they are pretty decent sword units. So that's the end of the battle. These guys, I think Nighthawk probably gave up at this point. These guys aren't even facing the right way. And I'm very happy about how this battle went. Have a look at the kills here, just a mass of dead Syracusans. Heroic victory. And this is what I kind of like with one of my favorite things about multiplayer, is when you're able to accurately predict what your opponent is going to bring. You're able to counter that, and you're able to time the attacks perfectly, so that you basically get a result like this. Now, I don't think I've had a victory as decisive as this against a decent opponent ever, especially not against the counter build. So 1600 kills and 200 losses, I don't see that very often. And most of my guys were absolutely effective, and that's usually a sign that you're able to counter an army fairly well, when you're able to win quickly, and when most of your units, or all of them, are able to be very effective, and you're left with quite a lot of them at the end of the battle. So these guys took the most casualties, but these guys were absolutely fine against the hoplites. So well, just one more thing before I end this video here. I'd like to show you a build that I like quite a lot when facing Parthia, because I think my opponent had the right idea there. It was just too much of a hard counter and too predictable. So if I was to counter Parthia here, I would probably go for something like 6 thorax hoplites, 6 Thoreo spears, and I would bring cavalry to die down cataphracts and to kill any potential skirmishers. For anti-elephant tools, I would bring 2 Tarentine cavalry, and I'd probably bring some, to be honest, some peltasts here. So 2 light peltasts, that's a pretty decent counter to Parthia, I think. I've had a lot of success with it. It's going to be difficult to kill off all these thorax hoplites. In phalanx they can defeat the well, not defeat, but hold off the Parthian swords for quite some time. The Thoreos can support cavalry engagements, they can support infantry engagements, and with this build, elephants won't be a problem. Swords won't really be a huge problem either. If you want to go a bit ballsy, you can remove the thorax hoplites, most of them anyway, you still keep your general, and instead you can go for thorax swords, since they have an identical cost. Then you just need to be a bit more aware of enemy cavalry and use your shield walls to greater effect and such, tie them down with citizen cavalry. But I think both these builds can work fairly well. You lack long-range skirmishing capabilities, but you're not really vulnerable to long-range skirmishing either, because you have so many infantry units that have decent shields and good armor. So hopefully this battle was as fun to watch as it was for me to play, and I'll see you again on the battlefield.